Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of hundreds of monster ecology and strategy videos on my channel, including a complete A to Z of the core monster manual, and this monster that I'm going to cover today is from Volo's Guide to Monsters. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing, as I upload at least twice a week. This episode might prove a little bit contentious as it covers another creature that has had a radical redesign in 5th edition that I think does very little to enhance the creature at all. So let's settle back, grab a beverage and get deeply nerdy as we explore the original and latest version of the Devourer. My first reaction when I took a look at the entry on the Devourer in Volo's Guide to Monsters and saw that this classic undead horror was listed as a fiend was that my eyes widened and I said, what? Why? Who? Huh? And then I read the entry and things immediately bothered me. First, they completely threw out the origin and great backstory for the Devourers from 3.5 edition for no reason. Second, the new version being a creation of Orcus makes no sense to anyone who understands the motivations of Orcus. So to explain, let's first take a look at the origin story of the Devourer from the 3.5 edition. First, the broad overview. Devourers are a species of undead from the various worlds of Dungeons & Dragons. They resemble enormous undead humanoids with gaping hollows in the centre of their chest. Devourers are soul eaters, and when a devourer has a soul imprisoned in its unearthly gullet, a tiny tortured effigy of the victim appears inside the hollow in their chest, acting like a prisoner held in a cage. The first devourers appeared as a result of people dying on the astral plane and then somehow reviving, but they have since spread across the planes. Orcus finds them particularly appealing. Now the specifics. They first appeared in the Monstrous Compendium Planescape Appendix, Issue 3 for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. They appeared for 3rd edition, updated and with a more detailed monster ecology article in the pages of Dragon Magazine number 355 published in May 2007, which is where I'll be talking about the detailed story of their origin specifically. They showed up still as undead creatures in 4th edition's D&D's core monster manual. As typical of that edition, they were divided into 3 types for the various tiers of play. So we have the original type, now called the Spirit Devourer, the 2 new types, the conversion of a different type of undead called a Morgue, now called the Viscera Devourer, and a new, more powerful type called the Soul Spike Devourer, with a wide open torso and huge horn-like ribs that it impales multiple souls on until it's ready to consume them. The first Devourers were a completely unexpected accident, and it occurred in the astral plane in a time when the former Lich Queen of the Githyanki, who was as usual had taken the traditional name of Vlaakith, had summoned one of her most infamous generals named Zinferit to the royal palace called Sasaurus, also known as the Palace of Whispers. Zinferit was an incredibly driven and highly capable warlock warrior who had risen through the Lich Queen's legions in the 6th century of her rule. He gained a huge reputation as an unstoppable conqueror, constantly campaigning across the multiverse, subjugating prime material worlds, annihilating illithid strongholds, and gaining many loyal followers thanks to his habit of sharing the spoils with those he fought under his command. His confidence was reserved, however, only for a tight cohort of his most capable and loyal followers that he was wont to put to most rigorous, often lethal tests to prove themselves to him. By the time he was summoned by the Lich Queen for the ultimate honour of having his soul consumed by Her Highness, he was ready to stage a coup and take the throne for himself, no matter how many of his followers died in the attempt. There was no way he was going to give up his soul to the Lich Queen, and she, as you would expect, was completely aware of this fact and aware of the fact that he was arriving in force to stage a coup. The following insurrection and loss of life was horrific, and the exact details of it have since been repressed, but it is known that a decade later there was a new Vlaakith sitting on the throne and Zinferit was never seen again. But we are not limited to the records of the Githyanki, and I can investigate further. By sacrificing the majority of his most capable cohort, Zinferit managed to escape the Palace of Whispers and retreat into the depths of the astral plane, with Vlaakith's most zealous champions hot on their trail. For 6 years, as time passes on the material plane, the warlock evaded them, and his cat and mouse game taking him and the Queen's champions far and wide across the astral plane and occasionally to other planes, but eventually it came to a conclusion and the Queen's champions returned to the palace triumphant, the renegade warlock's soul trapped inside a black gemstone, becoming a prized possession of the Lich Queen. However, This was not the end of Zinferet. In some ways, this was just the beginning. His body was abandoned by the champions to simply drift through the most forlorn wasteland of the astral plane, propelled slowly by astral winds to float close beside a pitch-black colour pool that led directly to the negative energy plane. There, some mysterious process, perhaps his evil alignment, combined the negative energy emanations, the astral wind, and some other force, and the soulless husk, the corpse of Zinferet, woke up in a tormented state of unlife. Zinferet's body, along with some of his fellow rebels, was shriveled, desiccated, yet the energies of the negative energy plane had swollen their bodies and his to a giant size, easily 500 pounds or 226 kg, fully 9 feet or 2.74 meters tall, gaunt but still powerfully built, and with a great gaping cavity in the middle of their chest. Zinferet retained the full memory of his death and was acutely aware that his body lacked a soul. Every fibre of his being screamed out for it in a kind of alien hunger that mortal creatures cannot understand, and which, if left unsatisfied for even a few days, will lead to a desperate madness. Along with his fellow reanimated warriors, they set out immediately in a cunning plan to infiltrate and take back their captured souls, but soon found that they could satisfy their craving, at least for a little while, with the soul of another creature. The more akin to the original soul it was, the more satisfactory it would be, and thus the first Devourers were born, and the doom of Lakith's rule was sealed. Since that time, more and more Devourers have appeared, so it seems that there is either some discovery of a creation process, or the freak occurrence is more commonplace than people at first thought, or whatever that third factor was in their creation is actively at work. As for the original Devourers, they returned to Sasurus, and the death toll was massive, as no Githyanki, no being, had ever seen anything like a Devourer before. They were ill-prepared, and the Devourers were some of the most powerful that have ever existed. Nobody knows if Zinferet was successful. Several of his cohort did manage to escape with their soul gems, but their fate is unknown. Not long after, the new Lich Queen took her throne, and the Githyanki reeled with the dreadful realization that was yet another horrific possibility in the list of fates they could meet in the astral plane. Nobody really knows for sure if all the Devourers are the same, or even what would happen if one of them regained its soul. Would they simply meet a proper end and release the soul to its proper fate? What of the Devourers whose soul has already departed for the outer planes? It's a very real likelihood that the soul could be existing in one of the upper or lower planes, unaware that it is being hunted down by its former mortal remains, now given a terrible semblance of life. The Githyanki origin is not the only cause of their existence. It's thought that some cases where the tricky, transformative ritual an arcanist undergoes in order to become a lich occasionally fails, and while the soul is successfully transferred to a magical phylactery, it is unfortunately flung across the multiverse to some unknown corner, resulting in the spellcaster becoming a devourer. In another instance, a freak result of a barghest contracting and then dying from ghoul fever contracted from a ghast, resulting in a truly formidable undead beast. This may in fact be a deliberate result orchestrated by another devourer, who often work alongside ghasts and ghouls, as the devourer is only interested in living prey, and the two forms of undead don't compete with each other to satisfy their loathsome cravings. Devourers are not highly likely to want to create more of their own kind, though. They don't associate with each other normally. Their quest to find their own soul is a relatively solitary one, and their need to constantly feed on souls to satisfy their constant hunger drives them to keep on the move and resent any potential competition, so they don't have lairs and they don't typically keep treasure piles. Another possible cause for them to come into existence is a rare ritual passed through the hands of the most despicable cults of the god Nerul. In the hands of one of the dark god's high clerics, the body of a person who has died of starvation can be taken to the astral or ethereal plane and transformed into a devourer, though it is hard to control these intelligent undead unless they were fanatical followers of Nerul in the first place, in which case they see themselves a bit like his grim reaper angels. Remember, they retain their intelligence. Devourers have a mind. They are as intelligent as they were in life and driven by a hunger not limited by any biological restraints. They don't have a biology as we understand it. They don't feel pain of their physical form. They feel a pain unlike anything we can imagine, a deep and fundamental wrongness, like reality itself is burning them apart from the inside out, and the only thing that can quench their agony is their own soul, or until they can get it back, some other soul, for as long as it lasts until their agony consumes it as well. As we know, the energy of the soul is powerful. It provides the Devourers with extraordinary powers, but they don't really want to use those powers unless they have to, because as much power as they expend, the faster the soul captured within them burns away, leaving them with the full force of their excruciating emptiness. So that's the undead version of the Devourer. Now let's take a look at the 5th edition version and the lore contained in the pages of Volo's Guide to Monsters. Please excuse me if I sound a bit sarcastic and snarky during this. First of all, it's now a demon, a being of incarnate chaos that derives sustenance and pleasure from rage, destruction, and acts of brutal, sickening evil. Born from the corrupted elemental mantle are infused with fragmented alien psychic entities who obey the laws of another alien multiverse and will stop at nothing to reduce all of reality to a state of utter madness and ruin. Seated on his throne of silent skeletons, the bloated and repulsive demon lord Orcus rules a realm of death, a layer of the abyss that is a gargantuan dread city of mausoleums and the wandering undead, all completely subjugated by his tremendous will. See, demon lords are a bit like elemental lords in that regard. What you normally think of as the form and powers of Orcus are actually just his aspects, sent to other planes to make a direct hand in events that interest him. The true form of Orcus is a locus of incredible destructive power that other demons are drawn to, like Orcus was an all-you-can-eat buffet of extreme destruction. They see him and other demon lords as the instruments by which the multiverse will fall before them, so they're super weapons. And as they come within reach of his mind and will, they are infused with the essence and will of him, so that the demons who serve him become somewhat like him, and they are often undead or gain great powers over undeath. They are released from the burden of free will and instead bathe in the rage and ego of Orcus, like they're soaking up the heat in a spa pool. Who needs to worry about anything when you are constantly buzzing on the good stuff? When Orcus is annoyed, his demon horde is enraged. When he is angry, they are in a state of mindless, fanatical, berserk fury, swollen with demonic power and the destruction it brings, releasing the rage and corruption like an infection that turns matter into twisted goop. Walls grow organs, screaming maws strain to break through, pulling themselves out of the corrupted chaos, taking physical form and immediately becoming swamped by the roaring willpower of their demon lord. Orcus, however, hates all life. He hates all free will, apart from his own. He wants absolute control over everything, every being, every soul. Anything living must, as he see it, be made to be dead, and in death be his alone to completely dominate. So, what is his motivation for creating Devourers? That's a good question. I suppose it does make sense that Orcus would create them in order to tear the souls from the living and thereby spread the peace and silence of death across the multiverse. But why use demons for that? It makes even more sense that he would create undead creatures under his control, or elevate his most fanatical nihilistic cultists to the honour of serving him in eternal undeath. Still, this is what they've presented us with, so let's take a closer look. A large demon that looks very much like it is undead. They describe them as mummy-like, so wrapped in bandages? No, just dry and dead looking. Challenge rating 13, which is actually fairly low for a creature that is supposed to be a demonic leader of undead forces in service to a major demon lord. Armor class 16, the only damage immunity is to poison, resistant to cold, fire and lightning, so no resistance to necrotic energy at all, vulnerable to any ordinary weapon. It does have the demonic traits that it doesn't need air, food, water or sleep. However, they do need the vital energy of souls, which they literally consume like food. Or do they? They are created by Orcus with a lesser demon is elevated in his service, whereby he then transforms it into an 8-foot tall humanoid with a hollowed out ribcage, sacrificing another demon that he doesn't like to provide it with sustenance. And I quote, "Most Devourers remain in the abyss or on the astral plane or ethereal plane, pursuing Orcus's schemes and interests in those realms." When Orcus sends Devourers to the material plane, he often sends them on a mission to create, control, and lead a plague of undead, skeletons, zombies, ghouls, and ghasts, and shadows are particularly attracted to the presence of the Devourer. Really? Why are they? Well, they do have a couple of abilities. The most famous, of course, is the ability to imprison a soul. The Devourer chooses a living humanoid with 0 hit points that it can see within 30 feet of it. That creature is teleported inside the Devourer's ribcage and imprisoned there. A creature imprisoned in this manner has disadvantage on saving throws, and if it dies while imprisoned, the Devourer regains 25 hit points and immediately recharges its second special ability called Soul Rend, and gains an additional action on its next turn. Additionally, at the start of its next turn, the Devourer regurgitates the slain creature as a bonus action, and the creature becomes an undead. If the victim had 2 or fewer hit dice while it was alive, it becomes a zombie. If it has 3 or 5 hit dice while it was alive, it becomes a ghoul. Otherwise, it becomes a wight. A Devourer can imprison only one creature at a time. Okay, so before we dissect that, the Soul Rend ability has a recharge mechanic. So once it is used, you roll a 6-sided die, and if you get a 6, it recharges the ability, as well as if it gets recharged by devouring an imprisoned soul. So the Devourer creates a vortex of life-draining energy in a 20-foot radius centered on itself, so every direction. Each humanoid in that area must make a DC 18 Constitution saving throw, taking 8d10 necrotic damage on a failed save or half as much damage on a successful one, increasing the damage by 10 for each living humanoid with 0 hit points in the area. Its only other ability is telepathy and dark vision, and 2 claw attacks per round it can perform in addition to either using its Soul Rend or its imprisoning ability. The claw attacks are plus 10 to hit, only a 5-foot reach, and do 2d6 plus 5 slashing damage, plus 6d6 necrotic damage per strike. The Devourer, well, it's got a lot of strength and constitution, intelligence of 13, charisma of 16, speed of 30 feet per round, which is fairly ponderous for an 8-foot tall demon predator, and 17d10 plus 85, or between 102 and 255, with an average of 178 hit points. So this creature pumps out necrotic energy in a 20-foot vortex, but if it happens to be standing next to another Devourer that does the same thing, it has to make a saving throw just like any other creature. Yeah, that makes sense. The Devourer chooses only humanoid targets to imprison. Sure, I suppose it's been instructed to target them for some reason. Too bad if Orcus sends them to disrupt the plans of Demogorgon and his fanatical cults of evil manta rays, and the necrotic vortex only damages humanoids. Yeah, that makes sense. The Devourer is fueled at its creation by the soul of a lesser demon, and the Devourer is filled with a hunger for souls by Orcus, so it's like a psychological obsession, rather than needing to actually eat a soul per se, which I suppose is fine, it's a demon, whatever. Does this mean that some sort of greater restoration spell could free a Devourer from this compulsion, or could it be regarded as a curse? The undead Devourer has no such hope of salvation. When the Devourer teleports a dying humanoid inside itself, it's a bit of a squeeze for a creature that's only 8 feet tall. What if the target is a minotaur, an ogre, or something? It says it actually pulls the victim's body into itself and then essentially mentally screams into its mind until it dies. Then, hey presto, it transforms into a type of undead based on the hit dice it had while it was alive, and the Devourer, and I quote again, regurgitates it, and it springs forth now in service to the Devourer. A wight, an intelligent undead creature that died from being tortured inside the Devourer, pops out calling it master. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, putting this version aside for a moment, trainwreck, dumpster fire, let's look at the abilities of the original form of the Devourer, which is not actually undead. The original form of the Devourer wasn't undead, and it wasn't a demon. They had no direct connection to the negative energy plane. They are just beings that existed in the ethereal or astral plane and were a serious threat to planet travellers. You'll see why these creatures were feared by the living and players alike. First off, their claw attacks not only sliced the flesh and inflicted an energy-draining effect, the Devourer could then force a victim to throw a saving throw, no matter how many hit points they had left, and if they failed, they entirely vanished, and a shrunken, powerless mini-version of them appeared inside the Devourer's ribcage like a rat in a cage. The victim was then technically already dead, and could not be restored by a raise dead spell while it was trapped inside the Devourer. The Devourer used its soul as a battery, like it was recharging itself, and could also redirect harmful spells targeting it to affect the captured soul instead. So, banishment, confusion, fear, charm, and so on, useless against Devourers. The Devourer's spell-like powers that were powered by the captured soul were Confusion, Control Undead, Paralysis, Ray of Enfeeblement, Spectral Hand, which is kind of like Mage Hand but nasty, Suggestion, Summon Shadow, and true seeing, once per round. Each hit dice the captured soul had while it was alive provided the Devourer with the use of 5 spell abilities, and once all those hit dice were drained away, that was it. The soul was gone forever, totally consumed. The only way to free that trapped soul was to destroy the Devourer or cast spells such as banishment to hopefully release it to the afterlife, after which the victim could possibly be raised from dead as per usual. The 3rd edition Devourer was undead, with the origin story I described before. These undead creatures had similar physical traits, but also had some spell deflection defenses, or a little bit more advanced. It is described as being tall, with strands of mummified flesh hanging from its bones. So that's where the mummy reference comes from 5th edition. Like the original version, their touch or their spectral hand ranged touch power allowed them to drain the victim's energy. Again, they can attempt to trap the soul of any target they attacked, who have to make a saving throw, and if they fail, the slain creature's essence is trapped within the Devourer's ribs, and the tiny figure visible there all the time that then takes on the victim's features. The trapped essence, because it's 3.5 edition, they don't say things like soul very often because of the whole satanic panic thing, but they do actually use the word, cannot be raised or resurrected, but a limited wish, miracle, or true wish spell can free it, as does destroying the Devourer. The trapped essence provides the Devourer with enough power to use 5 spell-like abilities for each hit die it had of the level of the trapped creature, just like the original version, and this energy, once it's expended, and the twisted soul fades away until it evaporates completely, and the little effigy figure inside the Devourer loses the appearance of that character. The trapped essence provides the Devourer with enough power to use 5 spell-like abilities for each hit die of the trapped, just like the original version, and back then this damage was actually draining experience levels from the trapped character. So even if they do get free, they had to make a saving throw or permanently lose those levels, even if they're raised from the dead. We did not mess around back in the older edition, my friends. Our characters could get seriously messed up from encounters with creatures like this, and we genuinely feared them. The spell-like abilities the undead Devourer could use were once per round, and assuming the Devourer had trapped a soul to begin with that had energy enough for up to 75 spell uses, a Devourer could cast Confusion, Control Undead, Ghoul Touch, Lesser Planar Ally, which it used to summon things like bearded devils or other forms of undead for short periods of service, usually no more than a day, such as Ghasts, and Ray of Enfeeblement, Spectral Hand, Suggestion, or True Seeing. The spell deflection was just like the original version, with the spells being redirected to target the captured soul. So if banished, Chaos Hammer, Confusion, Crushing Despair, Detect Thoughts, Dispel Evil, Dominate Person, Fear, Aegeus or Quest, Holy Word, Hypnosis, Imprisonment, Magic Jar, Maze, Suggestion, Trap the Soul, or any of those other forms of charm or compulsion were directed at the Devourer, it could choose to have them target the captured soul instead. So both versions had the power to capture the soul and truly destroy the eternal essence of another being. It was not limited to humanoids, but it was supposed to be a sentient being that it would target. They could do this any time that they made an attack, and they had those spell-like powers. They could control other undead and summon other creatures to serve them, and they were just generally extremely self-serving, relentless, quite independent, and very, very evil. By all means, come up with your own version of the Devourer using those abilities, features, and powers that make more sense to your campaign. As you can see, each time the Devourer has appeared in an edition, for the most part, it's a bit different to the last version we saw. And I suppose 5th edition is just carrying on that tradition, though I find the current incarnation rather dull and underwhelming, you could say. I think the monster listing itself has no soul. Devourers, unlike other types of undead, don't reside in mausoleums and places of death, cemeteries and things. They're drawn to places of life, so you'll find them resting in forests and glades and things like that, where you don't expect undead creatures to be. It's hunting for its own soul, so it pursues any method to do that. So they do actually take allies, and they can ally with the living, particularly creatures that are very unlike them, because they're actually drawn to souls that are more like their own, as if their missing soul is a jigsaw piece, and they can wedge other souls in there but they're really looking for the one with the perfect fit. And it makes deals with other living creatures, but of course don't forget that Devourers are very evil and self-serving. As soon as their own purposes have been served, they will turn on the living and betray and kill them. Please hit the like button if you made it this far. Subscribe if you like what I do. I'll let you in on a little something you may not know. I actually have a viewership over twice as high as my subscriber number. And hey, no pressure, but if you are watching my vids on a fairly regular basis, please, I really do need you to subscribe to the channel. It really does help out a lot because a lot of the tools and services YouTube provides us creators are based on how many subscribers we have. So this is me asking you, please hit the button. Also, there's a lot of activity every day on the channel's Discord server. There's a link in the doobly-doo down below. I also have a Patreon that gives access to all the scripts for these videos. There is also exclusive content, such as me reading out classic horror and sci-fi stories as audiobooks for patrons. It only costs $1 a month to get access to everything I post there. As always, you've been listening to AJ, this is the Mighty Glue Stick. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.